I just wanted to welcome everybody to this accessory unit study group meeting. This was a meeting, a committee that was discussed and decided to be formed at the planning board meeting in the middle of July at the request of a number of residents and in discussion on the items that would be on the planning board agenda for this year for issues to potentially put in front of the town meeting in terms of some bylaw revisions. It seemed that we should talk about this issue, and we thought that it would be good to form an overall study group so that we could hear all opinions, all perspectives, have an overall view of positions and what have you, and to also take a really good look at consequences, both intended and unintended, and ramifications of addressing this specific issue in the town at this time. Our overall goal would be to, with the committee, is with 3 meetings, we thought what we could do is air the issues, air the constraints, air the opportunities, and then report back to the planning board on November 10th, I believe it is. I think it's the 10th. 17th. Report back to the planning board on recommendations. I had asked Mary to send around an email earlier with the formal formation of the committee and the presentation we made to the selectmen and the endorsement that we got from the selectmen to form the committee. And I trust you all got that. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start, in terms of our agenda, talk first on definition. What are we really talking about here in terms of an accessory residential dwelling unit? What it is and what it is not. Then what I'd like to do is I'd like to, we have a short PowerPoint which talks a bit about an introduction to this issue, what other towns are doing, what issues are already covered in our bylaw. And then what I'd like to do is I'd like to open it up to a discussion, and I have a series of suggested discussion points that I'm going to pass around. And I can do that now. Go this way too. I think that's enough. Did I give you enough, or are we missing one?
Does everybody know everybody, or should we?
Well, let's do the introductions in a sec. That was next. I was just talking about the agenda first. Let's start with introductions. Go around the table. We could start at the left and go around to the right.
On the left? On my left.
Your left.
Emily Wentworth, Senior Planner, Zoning Administrator.
Mary Savage Dunham in the Community Planning Department.
Laura Marwell, I'm a member at large.
Marco Bohr, member at large.
Gary Tondorf-Dick, Chair of the Planning Board.
Aileen Callahan, I'm on the Hiingham Affordable Housing Trust.
Joe Freeman with the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Mark Cullings, member at large.
Bruce Catman, Hiingham Board of Health.
Dick Kirk, member at large.
Just also want to mention that for everyone at home, where this is being televised on the Hiingham Community Television, so if people can't make these meetings, they'll be televised, so you can follow what we're doing, and suggestions, comments, feedback are always welcome. So I think I'd like to start with, let's talk about a definition of an accessory residential dwelling unit. I looked through a number of publications just to see if I could find a concise decision, and the one definition. And the one that seemed to be the most representative was essentially this, that an accessory residential dwelling unit is an additional living quarter or quarters on a single-family lot that are independent of the primary single-family dwelling unit. It's not a two-family per se. It's essentially a single-family unit, and it would be in an owner-occupied dwelling, and the unit size, the primary residence size, is usually pretty much most of the single-family house. The accessory dwelling unit would probably be, if one looks at other communities, somewhere between 800 and 1,000 square feet. Typically, the occupants are related. It's usually a family solution. Sometimes there are people who assist the family live there, or sometimes adult children live there, but that's kind of typically what I've seen in terms of the definition. So is that something that, would anybody like to add to that, or what? Just want to get people's comments on that particular approach to a definition? Sure.
You said owner occupied. Do both units have to be owner owned, but the owner could live either in the smaller or the larger? How do you see
Typically, what I've seen is the owner, the primary owner could live in the primary unit or in the accessory unit, but it's definitely owner occupied, depending upon which unit. It's not
Sometimes it's the other way around. The primary owner is actually
in the primary house, yeah.
So if you're an aging, if you're aging parents, you could move to the
Yes.
smaller unit and
But
you could
have
have
it deeded.
Right,
something
right.
like that.
Right.
So, sorry, I'm unclear. So you're saying the owner could live in either of the units or not? That the owner would live in the larger of the units?
Probably up for discussion.
Yeah,
That's
I
all.
think it's
Okay.
definitely up for discussion, and some towns do it both ways, some towns only allow it one way. So, yeah, definitely we should
Gary, I think
discuss that.
At the beginning of the definition, I'm not sure whether it was clear, but this can be within the main dwelling or in an auxiliary, an accessory unit on the property, a garage or a
I
barn.
think some towns do that, but I think we should discuss that too,
Okay.
as to whether it's appropriate in Hingham, but yes.
The sizing, the 800 to 1,000 square feet, is that something that's a norm, or do people do it by percent?
in both ways.
I've seen it both ways, but the majority of the ways I've seen it has been a prescriptive number, square footage, maximum.
Right.
And also typically, there are minimum lot sizes also that are specified. In some towns, it's typically 10,000 square feet. Some towns, it's with larger lots, it's larger than that.
Okay.
So say about minimum lot size, that's an issue that we wrestle with frequently in the zoning board with variances. It'd be difficult to prescribe minimum lot sizes. There are many lots here that are well below even our zoning minimum lot size. Existing non-standard lots, so.
And are those typically, in which residence district are those typically in, the more
I guess mostly
non-standard?
in A.
Yeah,
Up towards, the north side of town.
right. Well, I guess one approach might be to have the minimum lot size also indexed into the zoning district, I suppose. And, typically like B or C is 30,000, so, that's the minimum for that. But then also the other aspect that comes in too is the idea of, in most towns, an accessory unit can only be placed in a unit or in a house, if single-family home, if the house is on town sewer, which was an interesting statistic, which would
For the density.
bear discussion in
30%
Hingham.
of the town.
Yeah.
This town.
Right. What about parking?
Typically, what I've seen is parking is typically on, there's parking for both units on the site or in
And so
the
there'd
lot.
have to be some provision for it, for additional parking?
I would think.
Yeah, right now the bylaw does, say you've got to have at least a minimum of 2 spaces per dwelling on site, like off-street.
And so the question is, if there's 2 per dwelling, if there's a accessory unit in the dwelling, does that mean there's an additional parking space for the accessory unit?
We also have to talk from a Board of Health standpoint on how many bedrooms are going to be there.
That's right.
If we're allowing the existing dwelling to remain as it is, and then add the accessory building in, we would have an expansion of use. An expansion of use triggers all of our code and Title V.
Well, wouldn't converting rooms into bedrooms also do that?
certainly in the sewer portions of town.
Mm. So we have to, room counts is very important, because after 8 rooms in a dwelling, we basically add the total number of rooms divided by 2, and that's the bedroom count. And each room has a wastewater discharge allocation of 110 gallons per bedroom, which brings us to the 12,500 square foot of lot area for each bedroom. What we do on occasion is modify the existing floor plan so that one of the bedrooms that are existing can be eliminated, either by opening it up, adding it to another bedroom, and then we in turn go ahead and allow the construction of another bedroom somewhere on the property.
So is the number of bedrooms a function of each dwelling unit? So in other words, if there's one dwelling unit, the 8-bedroom threshold?
Well, yeah, under 8.
Under 8.
Under 8, we do basically room count. We consider a living room, dining room, and living room as a give me, and everything else we consider a bedroom, unless there are certain aspects of that room that make it undesirable to be a bedroom. In most of the cases, it's being open and taking away the privacy. But if it has a window, it has ventilation, it's heated, and so on and so forth, then it could be a bedroom. Closets don't count.
So let's say, for example, parameters. If an 8-room house has an accessory, is proposed to have an accessory unit, and the accessory unit is 2 bedrooms.
So that would put it up to 10,
So
10 rooms total.
It's always
5
added to the
5
minimum
bedrooms.
8. You add whatever the other unit is minimum to the minimum 8.
Most of the time, they're using the same septic system. That may have to be expanded, but also the one thing that always comes into play is the 12,500 of lot area. And we try to explain that that's not a zoning issue. What we're trying to do is control nitrogen in the groundwater table. So the more gallons of wastewater you add, the more difficult it is for the environment to dilute that and protect our water supply. So,
Is that defensible, though, if somebody said that that's not in your zoning? And
well, it's in Title V, too.
Okay. And is that
Title
for,
V, excuse me.
Is that for sewered properties as well,
No,
or just
septic. But 70% of the town is septic.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it'll have great impact on where you want to, or we want to recommend how to do this.
So the current regulations are based on maintaining a certain health standard within a certain density relative to the land area.
Yeah, it was actually a very big component of the Main Street 40B.
We'll see if there's any.
Exactly. I mean, that would probably be one of the challenges, I would think, that they would try to. But, you know, we've done our homework, and I feel very comfortable that we should, if we don't make it through the building committee, I'm sure if the town decides to go ahead and take it to court, I think we can easily, or hopefully can defend that. There's a lot of scientific background for that.
And I think, Bruce, what I took from the testimony during that whole hearing on that 40B was that the Board of Health consistently and routinely applies that regulation to everybody.
Everybody. So. Right. New construction and expansion of use.
If somebody in Residence B, which is 30,000 square feet, that wants to add a bedroom, they're going to have to come to the Board of Health and essentially get a waiver of that regulation in order to do that.
Right.
Right.
So the key component is that whenever there's any flexibility and discussed or proposed, the original integrity or the original requirements and standards of the zoning and the Board of Health requirements are upheld.
Yes.
So one would be looking at maintaining the current standards, the current zoning standards.
I think zoning is a smaller hurdle than
Yes.
Board of Health stuff. And I think we've really got to look at how we can
do that within those rules.
I mean, like I explained, there are some ways to manage that with reducing bedroom counts in the primary structure. Other than that, I mean, there's technology available, but at this point in time, the Board of Health does not entertain waivering that requirement based on the new technology that's out there. It's set fast in 12.5.
One of the aspects that we found on the, in our updating the studying update of the master plan is that there are a number of demographic issues that are changing or moving as the population ages. There are a number of demographic issues that are suggesting that we look at some options as some flexibility. And what I'm thinking is that we're in the process of, we had an initial submission by the Metropolitan Area Planning Council on some suggested changes to the bylaw and updates. The Planning Board has not formally met to actually digest and decide and edit which ones we're going to incorporate, but this feedback from this committee is going to be very helpful in terms of the housing areas. I think what might be helpful is in terms of some background, if we had asked Emily to put together just some statistics and some data on the background. Maybe that's kind of ahead of the game there. In terms of the demographics, in terms of what we're seeing in terms of the demographic studies, and what it's saying, or what it's suggesting that we look at. And also within that context, we've also looked at some peer towns to look at what they've seen relative to this issue. One of the towns is Lexington, for example. And so why don't we take a look at some of the background data, Emily, and see what that might suggest.
Okay. This is just a really quick overview designed to help guide your discussion, though you've already started having a very good one. Gary's done a great job of already, presenting a definition of accessory dwelling units that more or less mirrors this. I'll just add that they're not always referred to by that term. Some folks call them in-laws, which would be a certain subset of an accessory unit. Others call them family dwelling units. Sometimes they're called granny flats. So there's different ways of looking at these, but we'll, for this presentation, call them accessory dwelling units, or ADUs for short. So a little more background on why we're talking about accessory dwelling units now. There's been some recent planning efforts, including a 2013 study done through the Senior Center called Aging in Hiingham, a Community Affair, and then the Planning Board's master plan work, in part, supported by the Regional Planning Agency, that tells us that our household size is declining. It declined 5% between 2000 and 2010. MAPC, in conjunction with the master plan update, did a community survey. 78% of the respondents cited the high cost of living as the top challenge facing the town. So while our median income is relatively high, 1/5 of households are making less than 40%. It's estimated that 2.3% of households have income below the poverty line. When you look at income in relation to housing expenses, approximately 1/3 of homeowners are cost burdened. That means they're spending more than 30% of their gross monthly income on housing expenses. 12.5% would be considered severely cost burdened, so they're spending more than 50% of their gross monthly income on housing. The situation's worse for renters here. 55% of Hiingham renters are cost burdened, spending 30% of their income on housing, and 1/3 would be severely cost burdened, again, 50% of their gross income. This is the second highest level in the South Shore. MAPC also notes that we have an aging population. They refer to this as the seniority majority. In 2010, 34% of our households included someone over the age of 65, but by 2020, that's expected to increase to 47%. So how would an accessory dwelling unit bylaw address some of these concerns? There seems to be a community need for housing options that may not be readily available in town today. Building permits that we see down the hall don't typically call for smaller rental units. That may in fact be in demand due to our declining household size and the proportion of cost burden renters in town. Accessory dwelling units by nature tend to be relatively affordable, in part due to their limited size, and they can potentially generate revenue for those living on fixed income. Accessory dwelling units also provide housing in a relatively efficient way, which we can talk about here. Sorry, I forgot to flip the slide. So they're reusing existing infrastructure and services, but at the same time, they're doing it in a way that tends to be scattered throughout sites. So it can be seen as less obtrusive than maybe a traditional apartment complex type development would be. Design standards could be crafted to ensure that the development's in keeping with our predominantly single-family character. And finally, the bylaw could potentially encourage reuse of historic accessory structures that may no longer function as they were intended at the time of their construction and could become underutilized or not maintained. From an administrative standpoint, we see other benefits. We believe that our existing residential zoning regulations could benefit from some level of change. We've seen a number of homes recently that include multiple kitchens that were permitted. So they're in essence providing a second dwelling unit within a single family home, but without the benefit of the special permit. We believe that prior building officials have in the past interpreted our bylaw as allowing what amounts to an in-law apartment, in part due to our definition of family. So the zoning bylaw defines a family as one or more persons of recognized family relationship, maintaining a common household, and a family can include domestic help. So if you have a single family dwelling, can that dwelling include facilities for your grandmother, your cousin, your aunt, your fourth removed cousin, your nanny, your butler, and can those facilities include second kitchens? We're seeing it. It's no longer how we interpret the bylaw, which creates a problem for folks that went through a building permit process to install additional kitchens. So while we no longer believe the building permit, the bylaw permits in-laws, it does clearly allow certain residences to be converted to two-family uses. So in the use table, use 1.2 allows the alteration and conversion of a single-family dwelling containing at least 6 rooms, exclusive of the hall and bathroom, existing prior to March 10th, 1941, which is the date Hiingham initially adopted zoning, to accommodate not more than 2 families, provided that the exterior design of the structure is not changed from the character of a single family. This is allowed in all residential districts, business districts A and B, upon issuance of a special permit by the zoning board. The board has reviewed 4 of these applications in the last year. All of them were approved, but 3 of them were in essence just seeking secondary dwelling units. They weren't intended to create a duplex or a true 2-family. They just wanted separate living quarters for their extended family. This picture here is actually one of those applications that was recently approved over the garage. I mean, it looks, and it's a big house, but it in all respects looks like a single family. They came through and got the special permit for the 2-family use because there is a 2-bedroom unit above the garage for extended family members. Our offices regularly receive inquiries from homeowners that are not eligible for this use. So it is an available tool, but maybe not an appropriate tool for all, in part because of that 1941 requirement, but also because some folks are not interested or able to put a unit within their residence and would prefer instead to put it in a detached structure. Finally, we're concerned at the staff level that the 1941 requirement may not withstand challenge. The Attorney General decided in 2 similar cases in Falmouth and Brookline that similarly structured zoning amendments would be contrary to the uniformity provisions of the Zoning Act because They, in essence, propose different treatment for dwellings that are otherwise identical in all respects but for the date of construction.
One of the things I'd like to add, Emily, in this portion of the discussion of the presentation, is I'd like people to look up on the state website, Chapter 40A zoning, and it's Section 4 and Section 6, and both are published and you can read and print them. When I read, there were two cases. One was down in Falmouth, and the other one was in, was it Lawrence? I don't know what the other one was.
Brookline?
Was it a Brookline in Falmouth? Basically, one of the assistants in the Attorney General's office interprets the issue of uniformity to talk about essentially treating structures and uses differently within a district. But when I read this, and that's why I've suggested to the planning board that we need to do more research on this, because when I read this, Section 4 says, any zoning ordinance or bylaw which divides cities and towns into districts shall be uniform within the district for each class or kind of structures or uses permitted. And the way I read Section 4 is that buildings built prior to 1941 in the town are in a certain class, some of which are in a certain kind of structure. So I'm not sure I agree. I think we need to do some more research and review of this as to, you know, the question that came up to the planning board is this, under the uniformity statute, is our grandfathering of buildings built prior to the 1941 adoption of the zoning bylaw, are those buildings exempt from the requirements of the bylaw? Now, Section 6, which is existing structures, uses, permits, certain subdivision plans. Chapter 6 basically says that a building that's built at such and such a time has to, you know, complied with the bylaw and or the ground rules at the time, but doesn't necessarily have to comply with the bylaws coming after that. So in other words, a building is indexed in the time in which it was permitted. So,
We're talking about grandfather.
Yes.
right,
Something that occurred prior to zoning being
That's
in the
correct.
community.
that's correct.
Right. And the Attorney General is challenging that?
They are saying that when a new use is going into such a structure, so it's not that what is there is being prohibited from being maintained, it's that the changes to those types of structures need to comply with the present bylaw.
But if
And
the use is grandfathered,
so if it was already a two-family before 1941, it could certainly stay a two-family. This concern is about, you know, a property built in 1980 next door to a property built in 1940, each of which wants to become a two-family. This one can, this one can't, only because of the date that it was constructed. So they're not being treated equally.
but the opinion is based upon the Attorney General's.
Correct.
And there is no case law on it.
We definitely could do some more research. So it's raised as a topic for this group to discuss.
I just thought we should
We'll look at it more. And
look at the
I guess,
specificity
you know,
of that.
yes, and the point, you know, about uniformity is one, but folks should be aware that we do presently have a provision that allows conversion of single families to two families, and you should discuss whether or not that provision stays, or is that amended, or is it replaced perhaps by an accessory dwelling unit bylaw. So you'll talk more about that.
Right now, just to clarify, right now, if the building is pre-1941, if it's a single family, it by right can be converted
By special permit.
by special permit,
From the zoning board.
as long as it's in a residential district.
Or business.
Whereas, and also, a building that was built pre-1941, if it already is a two-family, can continue that use, and that use wasn't granted by special permit.
Right, because it predates the
Because it
bylaw.
predates.
Yep.
And so I guess it gets into the other issue that that I was thinking about that we should also put on our list of items to discuss relative to this issue of age and grandfathering is the, where's my train of thought? I'll come back to it.
So, when we
Oh,
were.
well, I remember now. The other issue that I think it brings up is the issue of, there's a whole host of buildings in the town. I don't know the numbers or the percentages, but there's a series of buildings in the town that are essentially have been converted to more than one unit, but aren't on any of the records, and so they're not really permitted as being two-family buildings, whether or not they're accessory or whether they're full two families. And so the issue that's also come to my attention in terms of when we initially decided to form the study committee was how does one look at an amnesty program? Because the basis of that is if a unit, and other towns have found this and have successfully done amnesty programs, where they'll come in and they'll look at a building. The advantage is then you can make sure that the building is safe. B, you can also make sure the fire department and other life safety agencies know who's there, who's living there, how many units there are, which is important. But also there's the issue of having the buildings brought up to code if in fact the use is there and the use is presumed to be able to continue. I think we should talk about that aspect of this too, because I think there's a lot of concern about that and people would want to know, but what is the plan?
It's a great idea. Presently, the way we handle those types of cases, so if there is a two-family that wasn't clearly existing as of whatever date we no longer allowed two families, probably 1955 or somewhere thereabouts, or it was installed at some point after without permits, we require that they go through the special permit process, assuming they're eligible. So if they meet the criteria, folks adjacent to that have an opportunity to come out and say, it is a problem, it's not a problem, make sure that it complies with any building codes, and then, the board actually looked at one of those last year, granted the permit after the fact, and I believe we'll be looking at another that's in the office now in the next month or two. So when we were trying to better understand how other communities handle these types of regulations, we did an informal survey, found that not everyone is doing this. There's some nearby communities, Braintree, Hull, Belmont, that don't have accessory unit bylaws. Many more urban communities, Brockton, Lawrence, Chelsea, Brookline, likewise do not have accessory unit bylaws. But there were dozens and dozens of available examples out there that we reviewed in some detail. We found a few common themes. Most communities allow accessory dwelling units by special permit, but there was a fair number that allowed it by right, as long as they complied with certain conditions. Those communities tended to be places where they allowed accessory dwelling units either within a primary residence or potentially attached to a primary residence, and then the review process maybe was kicked up if it was in a detached structure, and then in those instances it would be authorized upon a special permit.
One of the things I found in some of the cities that towns and cities that were more densely settled, there seemed to be a correlation between the denser the settlement pattern, the more by right you had in terms of in the zoning bylaw. But towns that were more suburban or more like Hingham, and there was a much lower density that was the basis of the zoning bylaw, I didn't see any that weren't by special permit. So there's a correlation there in terms of density and urban and what have you.
We also found that most communities restricted it to owner-occupied properties. Most said they could occupy either unit, but the intent is that the use is generating at least one rental unit, and that it's still a single family. There's somebody who's still there, and responsible for the property. This limitation, though, often requires submittals of additional paperwork, affidavits, or restrictions recorded at the registry to ensure compliance. Communities almost universally created standards for size, requiring that the accessory unit be subordinate to the primary residence, but this took many forms. Some communities limited the number of bedrooms. Others mandated that the size be no larger than some percentage of the primary residence. Most frequently, communities seemed to choose a maximum square footage, sometimes a minimum, of somewhere between 500 and 1,000 square feet. And finally, most required that the additional unit maintain the character of a single family. So they included design standards, but those also addressed parking. Oftentimes, the parking for the accessory unit was lowered, similar to what our downtown overlay district does. It requires one parking space for units down there. And oftentimes communities for accessory dwelling units chose to lower the parking requirement to 1 because it's expected that less people would live in a smaller unit. They also addressed issues relating to services like wastewater treatment. Sometimes communities said you had to come in with approval from the Board of Health first or be on a public sewer system. Others, I assume, just make sure that that works out separately before they get the building permit. So while there were lots of examples to look at, we hoped that this group, before they focused on one particular community, could answer some basic questions about where you want to go with this. So this is the who, what, why, where, and how. Perhaps the most important question is why. Why would you want to create this type of bylaw? There's many example purpose statements. One that I thought was nice, primarily because it was relatively short, is from Reading. It says, the purpose of allowing accessory apartments within the town is to encourage the alteration and/or construction of a limited number of housing units, which will increase the availability of rental units within the town, will help to meet local housing needs without causing significantly adverse effects on the character and municipal services of the community, and will ensure compliance with state and local planning standards and policies concerned with land use, building design, and the health, safety, convenience, and general welfare of the inhabitants of the town. So answering the why question, I think, will help you answer some of the other questions. The next being who's your target market? Should it be limited to family members or domestic help, as we now include in our definition of family, or should it be unrestricted?
Segue to is the list of discussion points, because I think the first, if one's looking for a why or one's looking for an assessment of need, my response to the Reading summary is my initial response to that is I compare that to the other kind of a response that I've heard, which is meeting elderly housing needs. Other towns have said, for example, meeting elderly housing needs, keeping multi-generational families intact, and increasing the supply of affordable units. One of the things I'd like to suggest that perhaps we can chat a bit about is there's an issue of planning, which is dealing with land use and fundamentally dealing with economics. And then there's an issue of looking at this relative to as the benefit for, let's say, a certain group of people in the town is going to have an impact on the housing and the neighborhood character of other people in the town. So, for example, if one increases the density in a suburban neighborhood on 1 or 2 or 5 or whatever units, I think one has to look at the increase in terms of the economic model there would also come potentially at a bit of a compromise to, let's say, folks in the neighborhood who might not necessarily have that as a construct in terms of how they perceive their residential situation and lifestyle. So I just put it out there because I think I've heard a lot of response in that category that one reason to do this is an economic planning reason, which basically falls into more of the, some of the demographic basis that we've heard, some of the Planning Council, the MAPC suggestions that we've heard. But it's fundamentally economic in nature, and I think what I'd like to ask the committee is, what do you think about the idea of, you know, when we look at zoning, why do we have zoning? Why do we have certain uses permitted in certain areas? Are the uses typically permitted very compatible uses, or are they identical uses, or are the uses that are contradictory basically zoned in certain areas to protect the present and the future of uses that are in the majority of the zoning? So I'm just wanted to put that out and see what people thought, because I think there are many sides to this discussion, and I'd like to hear all sides, you know, the pros and the cons, and also in the middle. I don't know, what is your sense based on that?
I'm going to interject.
Sure.
I'm not ready to discuss.
Okay.
At this point, and I certainly, there's going to be a time for it, but can we go through this and hear what Emily's got to say? Because we're building blocks here, and our understanding of what it is that we're talking about.
I think it's good to look at what the motivations and what the reasons for doing something would be, but I also think we need to look at it in the overall context of what we have. And I think every one of the discussion points that comes out, I think basically kind of inspires a discussion in and of itself. So that's where I was going on the first point. I wasn't trying to stop the presentation. Well,
I'd like to hear.
If you want to hear the rest of that, then if we want to then segue into the discussion, we can do that if you want.
Sure, and thank you. I actually am very, very close to done and had forgotten to flip the slide, but this is what I started to talk about. So these are the questions that I think may help guide your discussion. It would be fine to take them one by one. If that's easier, I'll just read through them quickly and then we can revisit them if that's useful. If we talk about the who, again, most folks are limiting the ability to attain one of these permits to owner-occupied properties. And then I think you guys need to decide who the target market is. The what are these gonna look like? There's plenty of design standards that you could discuss. The most important one probably being unit size. Unit size and restrictions on it is likely to be it's likely to have the most impact on whether or not these units are affordable or relatively affordable. And there's ways of talking about, little a affordable housing, big A affordable housing. You guys can decide whether, there's some opportunity here to create some scattered site deed restricted housing that becomes quite complicated, or if the benefit is just in the fact that due to their size, they're relatively affordable housing, though they're not permanently protected affordable housing. And we can certainly talk about that in more detail if you're interested. Other design standards, we discussed briefly parking. Other folks also are, in certain instances, limiting the number of curb cuts, so you don't have a driveway on this side of the house and a driveway on this side of the house. Other folks seem to talk a bit about means of egress, so the general shall maintain the character of a single-family dwelling. People tried to codify what that meant, and oftentimes that meant putting staircases to the side or the rear of a structure so they're hidden from the street or fully enclosed within the structure itself. Where should these units be allowed? You can talk about what zoning districts are most appropriate. Is it like our two-family conversion bylaw, allowed in all residential districts and business A and business B? Does it make more sense in denser areas of town or less dense areas of town? That is a decision point for you folks. And then where on the individual lots should they be limited to within the primary residence, attached to the primary residence, or again, detached in accessory structures. And then finally, how should it be allowed by special permit, by right, is up to you guys. So here's last slide, just some quick available resources. Gary had asked Mary to distribute some of the smart growth material. I think that website is particularly useful and also includes a model bylaw. In reviewing lots of the other communities, you can see that folks started with that document. I mean, their purposes are exactly pulled from that bylaw. I don't have strong feelings on whether you start there or not, but I like the formatting in that they guide you to answer certain decisions, and they do make recommendations from their perspective. HUD has a great case study that I think Mary has distributed to the planning board in the past, so some of you folks may have seen it. I liked this Portland website. It's nowhere near here, but still has some useful tools in it. And then the Pioneer Institute survey, I know, Mark, you've seen that. I was blocked from getting the website from my work. So I'll distribute that separately to everybody else. It's just it's a long document, but it is a great little repository for many, many communities. Bylaws, so it's handy to have examples all in one place. But again, I think it would be useful, and I think, Gary, you were going here to try to talk about what would make the most sense in Hingham before we look to other specific models.
And one of the things that I found helpful in looking at other towns is that I was able to glean from looking at some of their proposals what the issues were that they engaged in, what was the thought process behind some of their proposals. And it was very helpful to look at peer towns, because looking, you see a lot of things. I think Lexington is one of the towns that I was most impressed on the dialogue that was going on as to the issues that they were thinking about that led to certain proposals that they made. I'm not sure the specific proposals they made are exactly what we might do, but it was good to look at the thinking. But let's say, I just put it out to the committee, I mean, do you think in terms of kind of looking at the more general issues, I mean, I think we've talked about need. Initially, when this came, it was the idea of finding a solution for aging parents and adult children. That was one of the points that I saw loud and clear. And I think there's a lot of empathy and sympathy in that. What I've also heard is that people are concerned about a radical change in the zoning bylaw that would basically institute two-family, multifamily zoning in the majority of neighborhoods in Hingham. So it's point and counterpoint. I think that if one doesn't deal with the unintended consequences, we're not going to get to really be able to achieve what we might want to do too. So I'm just putting that out as a discussion point. I just put together, and just talking with folks, these are some of the points that I've heard that have come up. I don't know if any of these we might want to talk about, or whether it's appropriate at this point to talk about, for example, if we were to address something like this, how do we do this and maintain the neighborhood character in a neighborhood that's primarily single-family houses, but also single-family houses without outbuildings, more, I won't say modern, but more 19th, 20th century houses, as distinguished from, for example, a lot of the older Hingham homes where you might have an outbuilding, you might have a larger piece of land, you might have a house and an accessory building, which would more easily lend itself to doing something like this without changing the character of the neighborhood. Whereas if you were to do this in a typical single-family neighborhood with an enclosed two-car garage on a large ranch or a cape, and you did an accessory unit, that might be a whole different ballgame. So I just was wondering, does that get to the issue of looking at the basis of the zoning? Does it also have an issue related that has to do with where, if, for example, are there areas in the town that are more conducive to this because of size and type of house by special permit? Are there areas that are less conducive?
Can we talk about what is currently allowed and where? So Residence A, Is where?
Residents-
I actually didn't see it in the zoning thing. Is that just,
If I can get on.
Back of the zone.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
know.
Is it in the back of the
maps
zoning?
yeah. It's typically the northern part of the town, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty much the,
Northern part. It's the oldest, you know, kind of,
it goes down towards Hiingham Center.
yeah.
Okay. So, the lightest yellow? So this whole portion here, so does,
The harbor area.
so in this Residence A, by right, by special permit,
By special permit in all residential districts.
In-
And
in
business B.
all
business
residential
A.
districts,
Yeah.
so they can, within the same, within their primary dwelling, they can add an accessory dwelling unit, or they can make, did you say a two-family house?
They can convert it to a two-family if it was in existence as of 1941.
Prior to 1941.
and
But,
consisted of 6
and is that
bedrooms,
for
et
both,
cetera.
the accessory dwelling unit or the two-family house?
So by default, folks who want to do what is in all, you know, by all definitions, an accessory dwelling unit, they seek the two-family use because it's the only way that we presently interpret the bylaw to allow multiple kitchens for multiple households.
That's a great segue. Why do we no longer interpret the bylaw the way we used to interpret it? It seems we've gotten more restrictive where we might have been solving that problem.
I don't think the bylaw ever very clearly allowed for multiple kitchens, but it did define family in a very broad way. And these things are open to interpretation, and different, you know, personnel read different things into it. So they maybe would have allowed, you know, the nanny unit or the grandmother unit because those people were still part of a single family to have their own separate facilities. But I don't think it was clearly there. So it's a flaw in our bylaw that it's open to interpretation. It should be much less subjective.
I think it's more the interpretation of the language, because in past years, that language was interpreted to be a family unit, something that was important for that family to be able to have 3 generations in their residence, or something of that nature. Maybe somebody was impaired or something of that nature and needed care. It seems like the interpretation is getting looser as time goes on, though. And some of the language in the bylaw I don't even recognize anymore. I think what we're confronted with here is a recognized need, but I think we need to spend a lot of time on the limitations that are going to be placed on what is necessary and what is not necessary. Because you can see what's happening here is that there's some disagreement as to what the actual language of the bylaw means.
I have a philosophical question. Is the goal for a new bylaw for accessory units to encourage affordability, or is it to encourage convenience? So in other words, the more restrictions you put on above and beyond the current zoning laws, the less affordable it becomes, right? On the other hand, somebody who's got the means, for them it might be very convenient to have their parents in their house. So is there an objective ultimately, or are we trying to balance these things?
That's what we're trying to find
That's
out.
what we're trying to.
We're trying to ferret out
Okay.
what these are. To your first point, I would ask, why is something that has limitations less affordable? In other words, if you were to put a certain size limit on it, or why would it be less affordable?
My suspicion is, having gone through a building project recently myself, is the more sort of thresholds you put on it, the higher the cost goes. So I would think that a minimum cost to build a 800 square foot additional unit is probably over $100,000, probably more than that. And so the more restrictions you put on, the less feasible it might become for those people that are really in need, right, to solve that. So I don't know. That's why I was asking, is this an issue to make it affordable, or is it to enable convenience?
Well,
Whoever was satisfied.
it seems that the need that was expressed most recently, at least what I heard, the need was basically to have flexibility within a family. So in other words, it's the family house but the family dynamics are changing relative to age, and people want to have the flexibility so that they can live their whole life in the home that they lived in all their lives, but also given the demographics of where we are, and we all have adult children, and many of the adult children are living at home, and so they're sharing all the facilities in the house, and you don't have that kind of privacy. I've heard that need. I've heard a need where people have a disabled person within the family. The person cannot live independently, yet they want to have independent space within the umbrella of the house. I've heard where adult children basically want to stay in the town. They want to stay in the house that one of them grew up in. Let's say if they're a young family, and they might have a parent or parents who are at the point where they'd like to stay with the family in the home and not have to do the other option, which is assisted living, that route. A lot of people don't want to do that lifestyle. They want to stay in the more traditional. So from a familial need or a family need, I've heard that expressed the most. A byproduct, I think, of this, sort of an implied byproduct of that, is that there is an affordability component. If an adult children move into a house that's that they grew up in, that's previously amortized, there's definitely an implied affordability component to this. But it's...
I think, I'm not sure where we're talking about doing this, but I'm thinking about, one of the things, I'm not a zoning and planning wonk. I'm just coming to this with an open mind. And so, but I did a little reading, and one of the goals of zoning is to create sort of a predictable character over time, so that if you're somebody who's lived in a house or in a neighborhood or in a community, you can sort of expect when you make your investment there for it to play out a certain way over time. And so I think if we start, I think it's easier to keep units where you have family members living on the same lots, sort of in keeping with the character, than if you have, I guess, rental units, which are affordable for people that may be coming and going, and we don't know for how long, or whether they're young families or college kids or empty nesters, whatever. So I think there might be an issue of less predictability of what it would do to the character of a neighborhood if we started encouraging that. I think. I mean, it's less difficult. It's harder for me to see where that would go, what can of worms that might open.
I think that matter of rental units, you
Used the term, Emily, and it made me go, okay, that's that could be a lightning rod sort of thing for a lot of people in this town, and the consequences, or unintended consequences maybe, of an action like this, because I do believe that I come to this committee after a family discussion, and some of you have heard this story, that I have a married daughter who may like to move into our house, and she and her husband said, "So, Dad, could you, when you're done with the house, could you live in the barn or in a?" And I said, "Well, it's true. Yeah, it's a nice barn."
It's better than without the pasture, I guess.
And I said no, and they were surprised, and they said, "Why?" And I said, "Because the town won't let me." And the way I view the zoning bylaw as it pertains to this issue is proscriptive. You cannot do most everything. And while I don't necessarily want to encourage the dividing up of big houses and the creation of smaller units, I think it's fair to say that I don't want to discourage it in certain circumstances. And I think, too, that when we look at what other towns are doing, we need not really reinvent the wheel. Emily forwarded to me, and I hope you'll forward it to all of the group, the Pioneer Institute study. It's 10 years old, but it's very comprehensive. And I went through it, and I did quite a lot of reading. There are a lot of commonalities, and there are a lot of towns that we can compare ourselves with who've already addressed this. Hingham has not. this is our opportunity to do it. And I think we can do it well, because I think other communities out there have done it well. Gary, you've talked about Lexington. They've had a measure of experience with it. I don't think it's, I think it's safe to say it probably hasn't changed the character of the town of Lexington much. One final thing, Hingham has a list of towns that it likes to compare itself with, and in terms of how it conducts government. There are 18 towns. 12 of them have this type of bylaw, ADU bylaws, accessible unit bylaws, and 6 do not. And that's as of 10 years ago. That's taken from that Pioneer study. So there's quite a lot of evidence out there that this is something that has been done, and I would argue probably done successfully.
Does anybody have any idea how many potential housing units this could affect? So if there's, I think, what, 9,000 or 10,000 housing units? How many?
I would say it could potentially affect, it could affect any and or all of the housing units in town. I mean, I just want to say
more and more and more.
Right, more and more, right, yeah.
Okay.
I just want to say that, you know, speaking as a 20-plus year member of the zoning board, I mean, I can think of any number of cases where we have permitted accessory units on properties, normally through the variance process, where we've taken, you know, for offices, a pool house, playroom for the kids above the garage, that sort of thing. And, you know, they want the opportunity to have, you know, like a kitchen or something where you don't have to keep running back into the house, or a bathroom where you don't have to keep running back into the house. And we've always taken great pains to restrict how comprehensive those facilities can be. Sure, you can have a bathroom with a toilet and a sink, kind of like a half bath, but no shower, no bathtub. Because we don't want it to be able to be used as an illegal apartment because of how we've always interpreted the bylaw.
Yeah. Well, and the illegal piece of that is, I think we're, you know, from staff perspective, what we're concerned with is the enforceability of whatever you end up adopting. And so for very legitimate reasons, I think the town is no longer interpreting the current bylaw to allow these, you know, second kitchens and these extended family units, but that's because it would be impossible to enforce when that family's circumstances change and the mother-in-law moves out, the kid moves out. What's to prevent them from renting it to somebody else because we don't have an ability to go in there and look at it again? But at the end of the day, and Marco, you spoke a bit about the cost, and I think that Portland website that's referenced estimates that for an interior unit, maybe it costs $45,000, for an exterior unit, maybe $90,000, so along the lines of what you guessed. That's a lot of investment into a property that perhaps is no longer legal after your family's circumstances change. And so there's ways of talking about the character of the neighborhood and maintaining that through design standards while still allowing people who are not related to people from Hingham to live there.
So when the primary owner of a house with an accessory dwelling unit decides to move, at that point there is an opportunity though to come in and enforce, right? Even so, say.
So we're not necessarily notified of somebody's transfer. So the zoning office or the building department doesn't know when you're selling your house.
There's a house inspection usually. So
by the fire department?
No,
for
yeah.
Like yeah. So there isn't necessarily an opportunity to get in there and look at it upon a transfer.
So what we do kind of sort of to rank police, for instance, innovative septic systems, so that the next buyer knows what he's got, is we require a deed notification on record with the registry, so that if somebody else buys that property, they know what they're dealing with. It's not 100%, but it's something that we could look into.
But I guess what would be the purpose of requiring that they remove those improvements just because somebody else is buying the house who doesn't happen to have extended family that wants to live with them? Or the kids grow up and they've got a bigger family and they no longer want to live next to their parents. You know, the investment's been made.
An accessory unit is probably not a long-term dwelling. It's an interim stop for somebody, maybe not. And so I think that
Somebody
if it's
or
a
many
family,
people.
you're familiar with the people. If it becomes a rental unit, it could be turning over, and then if 2 or 3 or more pop up, in the same neighborhood. You could have a different kind of a neighborhood than you've got now. And I think that would be the fear.
Yeah. So
Airbnb is exactly what I was thinking.
And it would be different because there's more people there, or because they're unrelated people there? I mean, I guess
I don't know.
I'm
I'm not sure what your agenda is, but I think
Yeah.
what we're hearing from the people that have constituted this committee is that there are people in town who are asking for family members and flexibility in their housing. And so that's what I'm hearing, and that's what I'm concentrating on.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of the initial statement of need, that's what I had always heard too. And so what I'm thinking is that there's an issue of reversibility, if that's practical or if that's intentional or desired. There's also the issue of maintaining the management of the property in terms of not letting the property change in a major way. So for example, if one ties into it owner occupancy, I'm thinking in terms of succession, if it's a parent and an adult child living in the house under an accessory unit construct, and then the parent moves or decides that they can't live in the house anymore, let's say they have to go to something that's more of a clinical kind of a residence, and they can no longer live independently with their children, so now the adult children are living in the house. Now, transfer of ownership ultimately happens, and is the accountability, is it going with the owners and with the people who signed on the permit and the relatives of those? Or is the issue, does it always have to be maintained as an owner-occupant kind of a structure? And I'm just thinking down the road about the consequences. And what does that mean to the initial decision? And do you do it to basically serve the families in the neighborhoods, which is what I heard initially, or is the ultimate purpose to serve a marketing need, which might be to make more affordable units? So that's a question. I don't.
Well, I'm for the former. I'm not for the latter.
The owner occupancy, and all of the reading that I've done of the various towns, they all, I haven't seen any that do not specify owner occupancy. And then to the terms of reversibility, most of the communities, I think it's typically a 2 to 5 year special permit. So if somebody comes up on the 2-year term, isn't it reasonable for the planning board to notify the owner of the property, you're due for a hearing on your ADU? I don't, but I think this enforceability and accountability on part of the property owners is key too. One of the keys.
Does one set up a license structure? Does one set up basically a license if it's in other words, if it's
There's no provisions for anything.
no provisions
No.
in that zone?
I mean, you can make it, a special permit under the zoning act.
Correct, you could, and you can require affidavits as part of that.
Correct.
I think,
I mean, it's similar to what we do now with the bed and breakfast
exactly.
provision. It's got to be owner occupied.
I think, to Emily's point, one
Owner
thing
has to
that's
be there.
very important on the staff team side is that whatever you ultimately choose to have, that it's something that we can readily enforce. Because it is very difficult when we have conditions that it's hard for the building commissioner or for us to keep track of. So there needs to be a well thought out mechanism to make sure that what you ultimately design, we make sure happens.
One of the things that I've seen in terms of the enforcement that has been a little bit of a pattern is the planning board will do site plan review on a subdivision, and the site plan review has certain set of constraints assigned, and within that are the health board constraints. And so we have lots that have been subdivided that are basically specified to have 10 bedrooms. It'll be a subdivision of 2 or 3 or whatever numbers of units that are, and so it's a 10 bedroom allocation. And then you see the buildings go up and you see that all of a sudden there's a 12 bedroom permit on the lot. So 3 houses, 4, 4, and 2, or 4, 3, and 3, or whatever the addition, the math is. And then where I see it, I've seen it most recently is I've seen it in the realty ads. The little photo postcards that go around that this is a 6-bedroom house. And having sat on the site plan review, it was permitted as a 3. And so I bring it up in terms of enforcement because people are building large houses with the intent of subdividing them.
Gary, I think that's a good point. All this discussion we've had over the past hour or so, the thing that keeps on coming back in my mind is how you're going to police this. If you put these types of conditions into the bylaw, then somebody has to enforce it. And we're not equipped at this point in time, I don't believe, to be able to regularly monitor what's going on in maybe 100 different homes in the community.
If there's conditions associated with a special permit with dates, there certainly could be routine follow-up, or requiring, as you said, your permit's expiring, please come back to the board, or annual certifications to the building commissioner. I think some places will do that. I mean, it's not, there are solutions. It's easier under a special permit than just a by right, but there needs to be some trigger.
But those periodic reviews really fall on the staff.
Well, yes, we're not going to be able to.
So Mary, the question is, are you staffed right now to be able to take something like this on? Or would it require more personnel?
Well, I guess my question is that a reason not to do something like that?
No, it's not a reason not to do something, but it's something that needs to be considered.
If you're asking me if there were approvals with conditions applied to them that had time deadlines, would we put them into our computer and track them and generate a letter and follow up? My answer to you would be yes. We do that now.
Would there be an inspection?
It would be an inspect depending on the condition. It might be a letter and the person might need to come in and talk to the building commissioner. Or depending on the condition, the person might need to come in for an informal hearing with the board. But if you're asking me if we're staffed to do that, we do that now on plenty of projects. So my answer to you would have to be, yes, we can do that. It just needs to be thought out and the mechanism needs to be in place so that it's consistent and clear and enforceable, and we know what your will is. Take the subjectiveness out of it and make it easy on us.
I have a suggestion. Instead of us, I did hear in the selectmen meeting somebody talking about roping in the fog or something.
There are a lot of communities out there that have experience with this.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk to them?
Right.
And find out,
What would be interesting to find out.
And come back and see the data. You all ought to have the Pioneer Institute and the websites and take a look at them, see the commonalities. Yeah. Let's talk to some of the officials who've done it and draw some conclusions.
One of the things that might be we might look at is there's an incentive kind of accountability, or an accountability that works by incentive. For example, owner occupancy, a higher accountability and by incentive would be related people in the unit. So everybody in the house is related. So they're all owner occupants and they're all related, which tends to take a lot of the speculative risk out of this. But as soon as you lose the owner occupancy, then it becomes an accountability issue that's externally monitored rather than internally, it seems to me. Now, that doesn't mean you would have fewer constraints or a provision of accountability on it, but it just seems to me that maybe you can build into the permit that kind of requirement. Now, I don't know if you can require these to be always a related family member. Could this be a special permit based on everybody's related?
It's the board's discretion. I would tell you, I worked in one community, the last community I worked in Connecticut. We did them, and I'm not recommending we follow it verbatim, but it was a special permit that was issued. We required it to be owner occupied, and typically it was an in-law apartment. In that community, the need was specifically in-law, regardless of who lived in the primary residence. And there was a percentage. The accessory dwelling unit could not exceed more than blank percentage of the gross floor area of the first floor of the house. and there was an affidavit that was required at the special permit. What happened was, those people would go away, everything would be fine. When they would come back on our radar would be when the house was being sold. The realtors would come in and say, is this really a two-family? At which point we would say, no, that's a in-law apartment. People were normally thrilled to have that, but then they were required to, it wasn't transferable. They had to then come in for another special permit, which can be, when you're up against a real estate closing, that can be a problem. But you can structure it, once you decide who your target is and what your goals are, you have the ability to structure it
Something that needs to be recorded.
the way you want
At the
it.
registry, so
I thought I was just hearing before this, though, that you're not always in contact at the sale. So I thought I was just hearing that there's not always contact at the sale, and so,
For the inspection.
I guess, but, you know, Emily's saying that the sales happen and that they're not always involving the town.
It's the realtors and the bank attorney that look at this, and they really cooperate trying to, and do the policing for us. Occasionally, we're never going to get 100%. You're going to have cash deals and things like, yeah, and lie. But, you know, if you can at least probably do the deed notice with the special permit or whatever the agreement was, it's going to come up when the realtors are investigating it or the bank attorneys are going to. And we've had good success.
Occupancy permit.
So the special permit could be tied into an occupancy
Permits
permit.
run with the property, they don't run with the owner.
Which one?
The permits,
Yeah.
the,
they run with the property.
Right.
But as long as it's in the chain of title, if there's that condition
Mhm.
within that recorded special permit,
Sure.
that should get picked up.
It should.
Is a,
Should.
is a way to look at this perhaps if the goal is to encourage the ability of accessory units, to keep it as simple as possible and come up with a list of all the negatives, right? So what could possibly go wrong, the unintended consequences, and then structure the zoning to mitigate these things. So for example, an unintended consequences, you know, the owner who had built it moves on, new family moves in, and they have, you know, 8 kids that come in and all of a sudden tax the school system in the accessory unit, and they're all cramped into this little, you know, zoning against that would mitigate that, right? And would probably encourage the town as a whole to say, okay, you've addressed all the concerns, you know, now go forward.
That's a good point.
Just-
I would think the permit would be issued with a limitation on the number of residents that could
Some are,
live in the unit.
some are silent on it, but
Many limit the largest number I've seen is 4 individuals and 2 bedrooms, but you know, it's certainly a limitation of that order would be something that I would endorse.
I would think that one of the, thinking of unintended consequences is the incremental change from the accessory unit to a multi-unit building. And how do you manage that? How do you mitigate that?
well,
Through, yeah,
sorry.
no, go ahead.
Again, most of the communities I looked at say 1 per lot. So 1 accessory dwelling unit per lot, period. And some have minimum lot size, 10,000 square feet lot size. Again, these are all, they're all questions that are good questions, but they can be answered, and we can tailor our whatever we want to do to this particular town's needs.
Could anyone envision a scenario where we got an area where 1 or 2 of these popped up and then people were moving in with the intent of building these, and you sort of ended up with a rental neighborhood where you've got one person, you know, living in an accessory dwelling unit, and you could decide whether that's good or bad. It would likely change what the people who've lived there for a long time have expected. So there might be areas in town where that makes sense. I'm thinking, didn't we do that at the downtown business district? We did the overlay, so up those top, I mean, I think that's a perfectly appropriate place for that. I didn't live there before, though, so maybe the folks who live there don't, but I don't think you'd want that to happen at Liberty Pole. And so I don't know what kind of a can of worms is being opened.
And I don't know if it could even legally be done, but I would have envisioned that these are not units that family members are going to be paying a large sum of rent to be living in. Is there any way to incorporate within the bylaw that there can't be income generated from these, or the rent can't exceed certain limits so that you're not having strangers that can move in? I don't know if that can even legally be done, but I would have envisioned these were family members who would maybe be paying a nominal fee to help out with utilities or something, but not actually paying market rate rent to be living there.
Shouldn't that be an internal matter to the owner and the family?
That's why.
Mark's going to charge as much as he can.
Make you bleed.
Well, one of the items following on your point, Eileen, was the issue of these as a revenue source. So, for example, the overall assessment of a property, if it's a single-family house, is a certain rate based on the value of that house. If for example, these are assessed as multi-unit houses because there is a contribution, whatever the contribution is, there is a contribution to the management and the income to keep the house going. If that were seen as a revenue source and assessed, then that's going to turn it into a revenue generating property over time. Because, and I'm just, again, it's an unintended consequence. I'm not saying it would happen, but I'm also thinking how these things usually start.
I got Airbnb room.
You know, and I'm just curious, how do other towns address that?
I like Mark's suggestion. I think we should take those 18 towns, even including the ones that didn't go this direction, divvy them up. It's got to be 2 or 3 per each of us. Maybe generate a list of questions, and we can all call 2 or 3, and at the next meeting, or even, I suppose we can't email because then we violate open meeting law, but we can.
Send them to us, and we can compile them and send them out.
I think we should have a uniform set of questions.
Yeah, I think
That's the other problem. We'd have to come up with that uniform set of questions before we start calling people, because if we're all asking separate questions, it defeats the entire purpose.
Is the information on the 18 towns on this Pioneer website?
Yes.
That's where you found it?
Yeah,
And again, it's 10 years old, so there may have been some changes.
Right.
The 12 that have ADU language in their bylaws, I suspect that of the 6 that are no's, that there may have been some changes there, but it's kind of hard to I don't know, tease the information out of a zoning bylaw, because everybody uses different language, and you alluded
Would
to
you like the staff to take those 18?
Oh, boy.
And kind of put the table and compare them for you? Would that be useful?
I make a motion.
Are you volunteering to do the work for us?
I have a list right now of 75 of those
Right.
communities with some very basic information. So do they allow it? Is it allowed by special permit or by right? What's the size limitation? Does it allow it in a detached structure or not? Or is it limited to family, or is it unrestricted? So those were the kind of the critical decision points that I was looking at and comparing them. Sorry, I was at a meeting till midnight last night. Yeah, I need to make it prettier, but yes, I'm happy to share that.
So it would be 75 instead of 18. But
Well, but we don't need to look at them all, and we can, yeah. Yeah, or the 18.
Just for consistency in
Yeah.
town government, that list.
Yep.
Use the list, I would do.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good list. There are some towns in there that I question as being compatible or comparable in Hingham. But there's commonality. The towns use that list for a number of years, so if we just stay with that.
Sure. And
If it would help you, maybe if you come up with the questions and the little holes to fill in, if each of us took 2 or 3 towns, it would lighten your load, but more importantly, it would encourage each of us to get a better perspective
I think some
on
exchange
things.
of information, you can't get the nuance too. I think phone calls are.
You have to read it.
I think you have to read it to distill the questions.
Right.
So,
And then, I think, if you were going to call other communities, it would be very helpful to know how many permits they see. So how many do you see in a given year, and how many of those are approved? And
Court cases.
Right.
Well, but the experience is very, very important.
Right.
Yeah.
That what, if
It's a real
anything, do they
concern.
do to enforce it?
I
How
would be
problematic has
interested,
it been?
I would be interested in getting some dialogue going with abutters to some of the residents in these communities that have these units next to them, and get their impressions as to whether or not it's a livable situation or not. We all have to recognize that there is a potential for something to go wrong in this situation. And I think before we write something out in its finality, we ought to find out what those problems can be.
So as a action item for next meeting, if you could distribute the 18, we could read the information in the 18. We could pick, if there's 12 of us, you could, or pick 2 or 3 of the representative ones. If there's overlap, it doesn't matter. But then we could distill a list of issues and a list of questions and a list of information that we would need to focus more on. You know, there are going to be some hot items that you're going to see, some parallels. Seems to me we could do that, and then we could get together next time and share those observations. And from that distill what the unintended consequences and thereby what the consequences should be. Does that make sense?
So are we going to make the list next time of questions based on
Well, I
what
was
we
thinking
read?
we read and distill
or-
it, and then next we
so we
could
come
distill
back.
it as a
Okay.
team or as a committee. We could.
Mhm.
I'd rather do it as a. I thought it was a week from Wednesday, wasn't it?
It's next Wednesday, which, the 22nd, which I can't be here, but.
Not a lot.
it's next
You want to do another week or?
We have another meeting scheduled for November 5th, which is the following. I guess I'm not clear on what we're giving you right away.
It would be the 18 towns and the data from the 18 towns that are on the Pioneer.
So
You
want
just shoot us
website.
the link.
So I'll send you the whole Pioneer bylaw and then this refined spreadsheet with just those 18 communities.
That would be terrific.
And so you guys will each pick, we'll assign you
Yep.
each a couple to look at in detail. And
I
you'll-
think if we individually looked at the information and from the information found 2 representative towns, let's say just for the sake of discussion, that were in favor and how they and they did it successfully, or you think they have a successful construct, and then take 2 towns that didn't choose to do it and see why. It seems to me we could take 2 each, 2 a favor and 2 opposed, and then we could compare notes next time we get together. And just sift from the 18 which ones you think are the most appropriate in the affirmative category and which ones are most appropriate in the negative category. And then we could compare notes, because I think the important issues are going to come to the surface based on what you see in reading about what the towns are doing.
You know what, Dick, I'm thinking though, is Lexington one of the towns? Okay, good. So I just want to make sure that the towns that we're thinking of include
Yeah.
Lexington, because I know you like that
I think
one.
it's Lexington, I think Concord's in there.
Concord,
I
okay.
think,
Can't remember what they
Bedford's
are.
in there, I think
Okay.
Hanover and Duxbury are in there.
Yeah.
I remember looking at the
Situate,
website.
Norwell, yeah,
I just can't
I just
remember all
wanted
the
to make
towns, but
Wellesley, I think.
Wellesley's in there, Norwell's in there. They're pretty much our peer towns. They're towns, they're not.
So we'll get you that information, and then you will review it, and the meeting on the 22nd, there will be a discussion.
Is
About the
the
substantive
22nd
review?
is a week from now an appropriate amount of time to distill that information and come back and get together, or?
Please explain, and I'm sorry, maybe I'm just rattled from the long day, but explain exactly what it is you're expecting us
So
to do before that next meeting.
So
whether
we're
it's-
going to get a sample of 18 towns, and some are for and some are against.
Right.
And so I was thinking and then we'll get a little spreadsheet kind of summarizing and making a little, that Emily's going to
prepare.
Emily's going to send out. And then I thought what we could do is we could take a look at samples, case studies of each of 2 towns that are in favor and 2 towns that were not in favor.
That's what I'm, where's that case study? What's that?
Not in favor.
They just
just
didn't do
haven't
that. They didn't adopt.
Hingham is
That's
a
fine.
no.
That's fine.
Pioneer, but it's because it hasn't been addressed before.
That's fine. That's a
But
good
to
point.
get down to those 2 pro and 2 against. We're each going to do our individual research and come next week and say, I think this is the representative too, and then we'll bat about
And then we
which.
should distill
Okay.
a list of, summarize a list next week, distill what we saw. That make sense?
Like strengths and weaknesses,
Yeah.
compare and
Yes,
contrast.
yes. And then
We'll send you a little summary. But, so you'll have the spreadsheet, the whole report, and then we'll assign each of you 2 or 3. There'll be some overlap, so you
I
guys are
thought,
looking
I
at the
thought
same
that
ones.
individually, we should pick which 2.
Whichever, okay.
We
I
should
just-
pick the ones you
Sure.
want.
It's gonna be complicated.
Then we're going to overlap though.
It'll overlap. But that's good reading it into it differently, because one might have one perspective and one might
Well,
have a different perspective.
so we're not calling any towns, though, we're just looking at information that is being provided.
I wasn't thinking we needed to,
Because
but
at
do
one
we?
point, we were talking about that.
you
That's
want
where
to.
I was getting confused.
Right, so that's off the table at this point.
We're just looking at what is going to be sent to us for our 2 assigned, because Tim White said he may be able to come in my place next week. And in the event that happens, I'd like to be able to clearly explain to him the
What-
homework
what the
I am
homework
passing on to
assignment
him.
So Gary, can you summarize it one more time so that we're totally clear?
Okay, what I thought
Yeah.
we should do is we'll take, the 18 towns will be distributed, the Pioneer website will be distributed. There'll be a summary spreadsheet, kind of distilling some of the information. We can take a look at the 18. There are 12 who've adopted, 6 who have not. We could pick of the 12 that have, you could
And-
pick 2. We could pick of the 6 that have not, you could pick 2.
And we're going to do that at the next meeting? We're going to pick those
Well,
towns
I
jointly?
thought we should, in the interim period during the week, we should assess ourselves, 2 who have adopted, 2 who haven't, and come up with the salient points in
Okay.
both categories that we see, and then we can bring those points to the meeting. And I was thinking that maybe doing that, we could then at the meeting, share those observations and come up with a list of intended and/or unintended consequences that we could focus on per your earlier suggestion.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
No? Sorry.
The towns that have not adopted this kind of legislation, there's no information available.
None.
You'll have to, that's right. I mean, it just says no in the Pioneer study,
Right,
so
that's what I figured.
there's,
I just didn't know. I thought there was some information.
So I'll take those then.
Now
All
we're
right,
down to 12.
So you look
I'll
at the
review
12.
those.
Just look at the 12. Okay. Look at the 12 and see the differences.
Okay.
There are different issues in the 12 towns, but most of those towns are peer towns. Let's look at the 12. I thought, for some reason, I've looked at so many of these websites, I thought that there was some information. There's also, when you Google ADU, you come up with about 15 pages of really good information, pro and con. It's interesting to see what people think about it. And so you just, if you have a little time to scroll, to surf that website, there's stuff
I didn't
there.
know what an ADU was, now I are one.
Yeah, well, then, one of the best ones is that the one website publishes at least 50 names describing what this particular item is. And the names are kind of interesting.
Do you have the capacity to actually give a printed version of this presentation, so that I could also give that to Tim, just so that if he does choose to come? Okay,
That'd be good to email it, we could all have it.
just to have, it would be nice to have.
And the handouts from tonight too, we will scan in. There's some people that aren't here. We'll be giving emails to everybody, and we're also going to have material set up on the website so that there'll be the agendas, the minutes, and any handouts or discussion materials online for anybody who wants to see it too. So we'll get it all sent out. We'll send you a link as soon as I know what it is. But in the meantime, we'll just email everything out to you.
Okay. Next meeting, can we have a whiteboard? Is that allowed to scribble things on there?
We have an easel and a pad.
Okay.
Do we have any whiteboards? Do we have a smart
We
board?
have flip charts.
Oh, we could do that.
Okay.
I thought we had
Old
whiteboards.
school.
I thought we had
Flip
whiteboards. One administrative detail, when attachments are emailed out of this server, what Windows program are they on? Because I can't open them on my home computer, but I can open them on my office computer, and I'm just wondering what is the, and there's other people who have that same problem, so it's,
For the PDFs?
For anything that you send.
Really?
PDFs, yeah.
Just-
You should be
What
able to
version?
download a free version of Adobe Reader, just open the
You probably need to update your software at home.
I think, it's an
You want a
older,
Mac, or-
no, it's a PC. He knows, I listen to a guru, he knows.
Yeah, there's all sorts of links on
Yeah.
the sites to, free version of Adobe Reader to download. It's not my favorite, but.
I think when I was trying to open it, I got prompted for a new Flash player upgrade. So
Okay, so that's, all right,
it could be.
yeah, it's an older. It's not that one or two versions of it.
I won't be coming.
2-year life.
Next Wednesday.
Peter Bickford.
Come in your place, great. Yeah, he'll be welcome. Great.
So you're gonna give
Thank
Peter
you.
your homework?
It's always good to see Peter.
Bruce, you're gonna give Peter your homework?
I might.
Delegate it.
I'll probably have to do it and then give it to him. We'll see.
Peter's a busy guy.
He is. He's very busy.
Okay. We're past our 8:30. Are there other agenda items you'd like to discuss, or shall we go watch the Patriots?
Yes. I'm gonna go surf.
Thank you.
Home.
All right, thanks
Thank
for
you.
all of your suggestions and your hard work, and,
It's just beginning.
yeah.